The chamber fell silent as the final verdict echoed through the vaulted halls of the Thorian Military Council. Kraith stood at attention, his gray-scaled body rigid despite the trembling in his legs, as Commander Vorthan read the evaluation results aloud for the third time. The repetition was deliberate, a public shaming disguised as procedural thoroughness. Reaction time, 42% below species median. Strength index, 5th percentile. Endurance capacity, substandard across all measured parameters. Vorthan's voice carried the weight of disappointment that transcended professional assessment. This was personal. Genetic analysis indicates no correctable deficiencies. The conclusion is therefore immutable. Candidate Krayth is inherently unsuited for military service. In the gallery above, Krayth's father, General Krayth the Unyielding, stood and turned his back. The gesture needed no translation. Among the Thorians, whose entire civilization had been built upon martial prowess and warrior honor for 3,000 years, this was the ultimate rejection. Krayth was not merely a failed candidate. He was a genetic aberration, a stain upon an otherwise unblemished bloodline. His younger brother, Ven, who had passed his entrance examination on the first attempt just 2 cycles earlier, would not meet his eyes. Krayth understood. To acknowledge him now would be to share in his shame. However, Commander Vorthan continued, and Krayth's heart skipped in desperate hope, the Galactic Defense Force has recently implemented what they term an integration program. They are accepting candidates from all species, regardless of qualifications. The pause before that final word spoke volumes. It is designed to promote diversity and inclusivity across member worlds. You may apply there, should you wish to pursue military service despite your obvious limitations. It was a pity offering, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The integration program existed primarily as a political gesture, a way for the GDF to demonstrate commitment to equality while maintaining actual standards through their elite divisions. Still, it was something, a final chance. Krayth bowed deeply. I accept this opportunity with gratitude, Commander. As he left the chamber, he heard his father's voice carry across the space. I have no eldest son. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. 3 weeks later, Krayth stood in the shuttle bay of Training Station Sigma-7, a sprawling orbital facility that housed over 5,000 recruits from 40 different species. The station hummed with activity, the organized chaos of military training at galactic scale. Everywhere he looked, he saw candidates who belonged, Thorians who moved with predatory grace, massive Kroggers whose footsteps shook the deck plating, swift Vexians practicing combat forms in designated areas. And then there were the humans. Krayth had heard of them, of course. Everyone had. The newcomers who had stumbled into galactic society barely 15 years ago, emerging from a backwater planet that most civilizations had overlooked for millennia. They were unremarkable by most metrics: average strength, average speed, average intelligence. Yet somehow they had survived their violent history and even thrived. The common assessment was that they were stubborn, perhaps foolishly so, but their military record during the recent border conflicts had been surprisingly competent. The GDF had begun hiring human instructors 2 years ago, a controversial decision that many viewed as further evidence of declining standards. Candidate Kraith. The voice came from behind him, accented in a way that marked it as human even before he turned. I'm Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. I'll be your training instructor for the next 16 weeks. Kraith turned and immediately revised his expectations. Sergeant Rodriguez was short, even for a human, barely reaching his chest. Her hair was dark with strands of gray, and lines creased the corners of her eyes and mouth. She wore the standard GDF instructor uniform, but hers was faded in places, the kind of wear that came from years of use rather than neglect. Her arms, crossed over her chest as she assessed him, bore the pale traces of old scars. Sergeant, Kraith said, snapping to attention. Whatever else he might be, he would observe proper protocol. Rodriguez circled him slowly, her dark eyes taking in every detail. Unlike the Thorian evaluators whose gazes had carried contempt, hers held something different: calculation, assessment, as if she were solving a complex equation rather than judging a failure. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Krayth had prepared for this question. "To serve the Galactic Defense Force to the best of my abilities, Sergeant." "No," Rodriguez stopped in front of him. "That's the answer you think I want to hear. I asked why you are here. What do you want?" The unexpected directness caught him off guard. Instructors did not ask what recruits wanted. They gave orders. They demanded compliance. Yet something in Rodriguez's expression told him that a rehearsed response would be a mistake. "I want to prove I'm not worthless," Kraith said, the words emerging before he could reconsider them. "I want to honor my family name even though they no longer claim me. I want to be more than 47 failures." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Good. We can work with that." The barracks for Unit 719 were located in the oldest section of the station, where the environmental controls sometimes failed and the walls showed patches from decades of repairs. 7 bunks lined the walls, though only 6 were currently occupied. Krayth's new squadmates looked up as he entered, and he immediately understood why Rodriguez had accepted him. They were all broken in some way. The Cleithian hunched on the far bunk was too thin, his breathing rapid and shallow even at rest. That was Zix, Krayth would learn, whose anxiety attacks had derailed 3 previous training attempts. Beside him sat Tora, a Vexian female whose species were renowned as berserker warriors, yet she moved with hesitant uncertainty that seemed fundamentally wrong. The massive Krogger near the viewport was Ben, who should have radiated the barely controlled rage his species was known for, but instead emanated a gentle sadness. And Prip, the small Skatiri vibrating nervously by his bunk, had tested at the top of his class in tactical theory, but had never completed a single practical exercise without panicking. These were Rodriguez's rejects, as the other units called them. The charity cases. The ones who would wash out within weeks, everyone said, because even the humans' misguided compassion could not overcome fundamental inadequacy. "You're the Thorian," Tora said, not making it sound like an accusation, merely an observation. "The one who failed 47 times. "Yes," Kraith confirmed. There was no point in pretending otherwise. 47, Prip repeated, his translator rendering the number with something like awe. "I only failed 6 times before they sent me here." "How did you keep trying?" The question was genuine without mockery. Kraith considered it. "Because the alternative was accepting that everyone was right about me. I was not ready to do that." Ben's rumbling voice filled the small space. "Sergeant Rodriguez said something similar when I arrived. She said giving up was a choice, not a destiny." "She tells everyone something like that," Zix added, his breathing still uneven. "She has many sayings, many stories." Over the following days, Kraith began to understand what they meant. Rodriguez did not train them like any instructor he had experienced. She watched. She asked questions. She took notes on a battered datapad that looked older than some of the recruits. While other units ran standard drills, perfecting established techniques and building traditional skills, Unit 719 spent hours in what Rodriguez called assessment exercises. She had Kraith navigate obstacle courses while she timed not just his completion, but how he approached each challenge. She made him spar with training drones at various difficulty levels, recording not his victories but his decision-making process. She even had him play ancient human strategy games on her datapad, peculiar contests involving moving pieces across gridded boards. "You are very slow," she observed after his 5th failed attempt at the standard obstacle course. The other units had moved on to advanced variations. Kraith could not even complete the basic version within the allotted time. "Yes, Sergeant. There was no point in denying the obvious, but you are very precise," she continued, scrolling through her notes. "You do not waste movement. You calculate before you act. Your spatial reasoning scores are in the 93rd percentile." Kraith blinked. No one had ever mentioned his spatial reasoning before. The Thorian evaluations had focused entirely on speed and strength, the traditional warrior attributes. "I don't understand, Sergeant." Rodriguez looked up from her datapad. "You are trying to be a warrior like your people define warriors, fast, strong, aggressive. But Kraith, you will never be those things. Your body is not built for it." She said it without cruelty, simply stating a fact. So we need to find what kind of warrior you can be. That night, after another day of watching the other units excel at drills his squad struggled with, Krayth found himself alone in the training hall. He had been attempting the climbing wall for the past hour, trying to match the speed he had seen from other recruits. His muscles burned and his hands were raw, but he could not seem to improve his time. "You are doing it wrong." He looked down to find Rodriguez standing at the base of the wall, arms crossed. "I'm trying to move faster, Sergeant. I can see that." "It is not working." She gestured for him to come down. "Sit." They sat on the mat in the empty training hall, the lights dimmed to night cycle around them. Rodriguez was silent for a long moment, staring at her scarred hands. "I grew up in a place called Chicago," she said finally. "South Side. Do you know what that means?" "No, Sergeant." "It means poverty, violence, gangs controlling streets, drugs destroying families." My guidance counselor, a woman whose job was supposed to be helping students succeed, told me I would be dead or in prison before I turned 20. She said this because of where I lived, because of how I looked, because of assumptions she made about who I was capable of being. Kraith listened, uncertain where this was leading but sensing its importance. "I joined the military because I had nowhere else to go. No money for education, no family connections, no options. I was small even for a human woman. I came from a bad place. I had no business succeeding." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "My drill sergeant was a man named Thompson. First black man I ever really knew. You understand what that means?" "No, Sergeant." "Humans have a long, ugly history of judging people by the color of their skin. Thompson's ancestors were enslaved. My ancestors from Mexico were treated as less than human. We both came from communities that the powerful had decided were inferior." She looked at Kraith directly. "He told me something I have never forgotten," he said. "Rodriguez, you are never going to be the biggest or the strongest soldier in this army, so we are going to make you the smartest and the most relentless." She stood, offering her hand to pull him up. "He trained me differently than the others. He found my strengths instead of punishing my weaknesses. I made it through Special Forces selection despite being smaller than almost every other candidate. Do you know why? Because you were smart and relentless, Sergeant. Because I stopped trying to be something I was not and I became the best version of what I actually was." She walked to the equipment locker and pulled out training pads. "You have been trying to climb that wall like a Thorian warrior, fast, using raw strength. But Kraith, you are not a Thorian warrior. So starting tomorrow, we find out what you actually are." The transformation did not happen overnight. Rodriguez redesigned his training completely, and the approach was so different from standard GDF protocols that other instructors began to take notice. While traditional training focused on building universal combat skills, Rodriguez tailored everything to individual capabilities. For Kraith, this meant abandoning speed in favor of positioning. She taught him to read opponents, to predict movements based on subtle shifts in balance and breathing. She introduced him to human martial arts concepts, strange disciplines with names like judo and aikido that emphasized using an opponent's strength against them. She had him study tactical theory for hours, analyzing historical battles from dozens of worlds, learning to think 3 moves ahead. The physical training did not stop. His body slowly adapted, building functional strength through repetitive drilling. But Rodriguez never pushed him to match the raw power of his species. Instead, she taught him efficiency, economy of motion, defensive techniques that required precision rather than force. She did the same for the others. Zix's anxiety was treated not as a weakness to overcome through exposure, but as a nervous system that needed careful calibration. Rodriguez built his confidence gradually, creating controlled scenarios where he could succeed before slowly increasing pressure. Tora's excessive emotionality was reframed as high empathy, a valuable trait for leadership that the Vexian military establishment had failed to recognize. Ben learned that controlled strength was more valuable than rage. That precision trumped fury. Prip received simulation training that built confidence before live exercises. "You are coddling them, Rodriguez," Instructor Vrak said one day, his voice carrying across the training yard. Vrak was Thorian, a decorated veteran who embodied everything the species valued. He represented the old guard, the traditionalists who believed that the integration program was a mistake and that Rodriguez's methods were undermining centuries of proven military doctrine. These recruits need discipline, not therapy. Rodriguez did not look up from where she was correcting Tora's stance. I am building them, Vrak. There is a difference. You are setting them up for failure. The galaxy is not kind to weakness. I am not training them to be you, Vrak. I am training them to be themselves. That is what you do not understand. Vrak sneered at Kraith. You are an embarrassment to our people. The kindest thing Rodriguez could do would be to discharge you now, before you get yourself or others killed in actual combat. Krayth felt the familiar shame rising, but Rodriguez stepped between them. Instructor Vrak, unless you have official business with my unit, I suggest you focus on your own recruits. This is my business. That creature wears Thorian scales. Every moment he continues this charade, he dishonors every warrior who earned their place through actual merit. Dismissed, Instructor. Vrak left, but his hostility remained, a constant presence. He began actively sabotaging Unit 719's training, arranging for them to receive inferior equipment, scheduling them against the best units during sparring sessions, spreading rumors about Rodriguez's methods. The other units, taking their cue from their instructors, mocked the rejects openly. Yet something was happening within Unit 719. Slowly, incrementally, they were improving. Not in the ways traditional metrics measured, but in cohesion, in tactical thinking, in trust. They began operating as a seamless unit, each member instinctively understanding their role and covering others' weaknesses. Kraith found himself becoming the tactical anchor. His careful, analytical mind excelled at coordination. During team exercises, he would position himself with good sightlines and direct the others, calling out threats and opportunities. He was not fast enough to be on the front lines, but he did not need to be. He could see the battlefield as a whole, understanding the flow of combat in ways that more physically gifted recruits did not. At 8 weeks, midterm evaluations arrived. Every unit underwent standardized testing, and the results were posted publicly. Unit 719's individual physical scores were exactly as expected, bottom quartile across almost every metric. But their team coordination scores were anomalous. They had achieved 97th percentile in tactical assessment, and their coordination rating was the highest in their training class. The evaluation board was unimpressed. Commander Thrace, a Krogan who had served for 40 years, addressed Rodriguez directly. Physical standards exist for a reason, Sergeant. Your recruits may work well together, but they cannot meet basic combat requirements. This is not a debate club. These soldiers will face actual enemies in actual combat. Rodriguez stood before the board, her posture relaxed but her voice firm. With respect, Commander, modern warfare is not about individual prowess. We do not send soldiers to fight alone. We send units, teams, and my unit functions better as a team than any other in this training cycle. They are weak, Vrak interjected. He sat on the evaluation board as the Thorian representative. Visually weak, which means the unit is weak. When combat fractures unit cohesion, as it inevitably does, these recruits will fail. Unless we train them so that cohesion does not fracture, Rodriguez countered. The debate continued, but the decision was made. Unit 719 was placed on probation. They had until final evaluations at week 16 to meet minimum physical standards across all categories, or they would be discharged. No exceptions. The pressure intensified. Rodriguez doubled their training schedule, and the unit responded with desperate determination. They trained during free time before dawn after lights out. Kraith became obsessed, sleeping only 4 hours a night, drilling constantly. His body adapted, slowly building the strength and endurance that had always eluded him. He would never match a typical Thorian, but he was becoming better than he had been. More importantly, his tactical mind sharpened. He began helping train the others, explaining positioning and timing, breaking down complex scenarios into manageable components. He kept a journal, filling it with observations and analysis, studying combat recordings like ancient scholars studied sacred texts. The unit became a family. They knew each other's rhythms, their tells, their fears. Zix could read Krayth's hand signals even in poor visibility. Tora instinctively knew when Ben needed support. Prip and Krayth developed a wordless communication during tactical exercises. They were not the strongest or the fastest, but they were becoming something else. Something the traditional training doctrine had not accounted for. At week 13, disaster struck. Krayth was pushing through a sprint drill, trying to shave seconds off his time when he felt something tear in his left leg. He stumbled, caught himself, and kept running. The pain was intense, but he gritted through it, finishing the drill. The time was still too slow. He tried to hide the injury, wrapping it tightly and adjusting his gait to minimize the limp. But human, Rodriguez was not fooled by Thorian attempts at deception. She cornered him after training the next day when his attempt to climb stairs had taken twice as long as it should have. Medical bay, now. Sergeant, I can train through it. I just need, now, Kraith. The diagnosis was a torn muscle, requiring at minimum 2 weeks of rest for proper healing. 2 weeks they did not have. Final evaluations were in 3 weeks. Without those weeks of training, Kraith would fail the physical standards. The unit would fail. He sat on the medical bay bed, staring at his hands, and felt the crushing weight of inevitability. 47 failures and now a 48th. But this time it was worse because he would not fail alone. He would drag his squad down with him. Rodriguez would be proven wrong. Vrak would be vindicated. I am sorry, Sergeant, he said, and meant it more deeply than any apology he had ever given. You believed in me and I failed you. Rodriguez sat in the chair beside the bed. For a long moment she said nothing, just studied him with those calculating eyes. I never told you about my daughter, she said finally. Krayth looked up, surprised. Rodriguez never discussed her personal life beyond the occasional anecdote about her military service. Her name was Carmen. She wanted to be a dancer. Ballet specifically, beautiful art form, incredibly demanding. Rodriguez's voice carried a weight Krayth had never heard before. She was not naturally gifted. She had to work twice as hard as the other girls in her classes, but she loved it, so she pushed herself. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, her expression distant. I taught her what I knew: discipline, dedication. I used the same training principles that had worked for me in the military. I told her that pain was temporary, that pushing through obstacles was how you succeeded. I told her that giving up was worse than failure. When she was 16, she auditioned for a prestigious company. During the performance, she injured her ankle, badly, but she kept dancing because that is what I had taught her. She finished the piece, received a standing ovation, and permanently damaged her ankle. She never danced again. Kraith understood the shape of what was being said, but not yet its full meaning. Carmen told me something I will never forget, she said. You taught me that giving up was worse than breaking, so I broke. Rodriguez looked at Kraith directly. We have not spoken in 7 years. She moved to another continent, changed her name, wanted nothing to do with me, and she was right to do so. I had pushed her to destroy herself in the name of never surrendering. I do not want to train you to break, Kraith. I want to train you to bend, to adapt, to survive. And surviving sometimes means resting. Recovery is part of strength, not a weakness. Do you understand? Kraith nodded slowly. But the evaluations are in 3 weeks. You will rest for 2 weeks. Then we have 1 week to prepare. It will be enough. How can you be certain? Rodriguez smiled, and it was not the confident smile of someone who knew victory was assured. It was the determined smile of someone who refused to accept defeat. Because I have seen what you can do when you stop trying to be someone else. Now rest, Kraith. That is an order. The 2 weeks passed slowly. Kraith watched from the sidelines as his unit trained without him, feeling useless. But Rodriguez had assigned him a role even while injured: tactical coordinator. He studied recordings of the final evaluation scenarios from previous training cycles, analyzing patterns, identifying weaknesses in standard approaches. He filled 3 journals with notes and diagrams. When he returned to active training with 1 week remaining, the unit implemented what he had discovered. They drilled a coordinated combat scenario specifically designed for the final evaluation, practicing until every movement was instinctive. Each member had a specific role playing to their strengths. Zix would handle technical systems. Tora would lead infiltration. Ben would serve as mobile defense. Prip would provide reconnaissance. And Kraith would coordinate from a defensive position with Overwatch, directing the team like a conductor leading an orchestra. They practiced the scenario hundreds of times until they could execute it in their sleep, until the timing was perfect, until there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. They became a single organism with 6 bodies, and Kraith was its mind. Finals week arrived. The entire base turned out to watch, instructors and recruits alike. Rodriguez's experimental methods were being put to the ultimate test. The whispers were unanimous. Unit 719 would fail. The rejects would finally be exposed as the charity cases everyone knew them to be. Rodriguez would be reassigned, her career stained by this failed experiment. Vrak made certain to position himself prominently in the observation area, his expression one of anticipatory satisfaction. The first test was individual combat. Each recruit faced an instructor in a controlled sparring match, scored by points and evaluated on technique. Krayth drew an opponent who outweighed him by 50 kilograms and moved with the fluid speed typical of healthy Thorians. The match lasted 90 seconds. Krayth lost, as expected, but he managed to score several points through careful positioning and defensive counters. He lasted longer than anyone anticipated. The other members of Unit 719 performed similarly. Better than expected, worse than required. They were in the bottom quartile, but they had improved dramatically from their starting points. It was not enough. The second test covered physical standards, obstacle course, strength assessments, endurance runs. Unit 719 met minimum standards across all categories, barely. Rodriguez's training had gotten them over the line, but just barely. They were still in the bottom rankings. The evaluation board members exchanged glances that clearly communicated their assessment. Passing minimums was not the same as excelling. Commander Thrace commented, his voice carrying through the observation area, "Adequate is not exceptional, Sergeant Rodriguez." Everything came down to the third test, the team tactical scenario. This was the culmination of 16 weeks of training, the final demonstration of combat readiness. The scenario was urban warfare simulation, a common environment in modern conflicts. Each unit was assigned an objective: secure a high-value target located in a simulated city district while defending against multiple threats, including automated defense drones and an opposing unit playing the role of enemy combatants. Most units approached it with overwhelming force. They were strong, fast, and well-drilled in standard tactics. They moved in tight formations, suppressing threats through firepower and aggression. It was effective, proven doctrine. Unit 719 implemented something completely different. As the scenario began, Kraith positioned himself on elevated ground with a clear view of the operational area. His physical limitations actually became an advantage here. He was not fast enough to lead assaults, so no one questioned his overwatch position. From there, he coordinated the team through their communication network. Zik's left side building has external security panel. Can you access it? Accessing now. I can disable ground floor alarms and lock down 3 entry points. Do it. Tora, that creates a blind approach vector on the north side. Take Ben and advance. Prip, I need enemy position updates every 10 seconds. The unit moved like a precision instrument. While other teams were fighting through the main approaches, Unit 719 exploited weaknesses in the simulated defenses that Kraith had identified during his weeks of study. Zix's technical skills eliminated threats before they became active. Tora's empathetic reading of situations allowed her to predict enemy movements. Ben's controlled strength provided defensive stability. Prip's reconnaissance gave them perfect battlefield awareness. And Kraith orchestrated it all, 3 steps ahead of their opponents, turning their individual strengths into combined arms superiority. At one point, the opposing unit, composed of top-performing recruits from various species, attempted to flank Unit 719's advance. Kraith saw it developing before it happened, reading the terrain and predicting the most likely approach vector. Ben, defensive position at Junction 7. Tora, circle back and come at them from above. Prip, mark exact positions. Zix, can you control the lighting in that sector? Yes, but it will take 30 seconds. Do it. Everyone else hold position. 30 seconds later, the corridor went dark. The opposing unit, suddenly blind and confused, walked into Ben's defensive position while Tora struck from an unexpected angle. The engagement lasted 18 seconds. Unit 719 eliminated the threat without taking a single casualty marker. In the observation area, the crowd had gone silent. What they were watching did not match their expectations. This was not the fumbling performance of inadequate recruits. This was something else entirely. Unit 719 reached their objective in 14 minutes and 37 seconds, the fastest time of the day. 0 casualties. Minimum ammunition expenditure. Perfect coordination. The observation deck remained silent for 5 full seconds after the scenario ended. Then the whispers began. The evaluation board convened immediately to review the results. The discussions were heated enough that voices carried through the supposedly soundproof deliberation chamber. Traditional faction members argued that Unit 719's individual scores were still mediocre, that their physical capabilities remained substandard. Progressive members countered that the team scenario was supposed to represent actual combat conditions, and in those conditions, Unit 719 had achieved the highest performance marks in the station's history. Vrak's voice rose above the others. They are weak, individually weak, which means they cannot be relied upon when unit cohesion fractures under pressure. Commander Thrace cut him off. But their cohesion did not fracture. That is the point, Instructor Vrak. Modern warfare is not about individual warriors anymore. It is about combined arms, coordination. These recruits demonstrated that better than any unit we have seen. The debate continued for over an hour. Unit 719 waited in the ready room, uncertain of their fate. Finally, Rodriguez was called in to address the board. She stood before them, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. They asked her to defend her methods, to explain how recruits with such poor individual metrics could achieve such exceptional team performance. Rodriguez's response was measured but passionate. You want to know what makes a good soldier? It is not just strength or speed. Those things matter, certainly, but they are not everything. What makes a good soldier is adaptability, determination, the refusal to quit when everything says you should. These recruits have failed more times than your elite candidates have ever been tested, and they are still here, still fighting, still improving. That is the warrior spirit. That is what wins wars. She gestured toward where Unit 719 waited. Kraith failed 47 times before arriving here. 47 times he was told he was worthless, that he should give up, that he was a genetic defect. And 47 times he came back. That is not weakness. That is strength of a kind your traditional evaluations cannot measure. I'm not saying we should lower physical standards. I am saying we should expand our definition of what makes someone combat ready. Because I guarantee you, if my unit walked into an actual combat situation against any other unit in this training station, they would not just survive. They would excel. The board deliberated further. Finally, Commander Thrace announced the decision. Unit 719 would pass. They would graduate from training. However, given their physical limitations, they would not be assigned to frontline combat units. Instead, they were being designated as a special reconnaissance team attached to Strategic Operations Command. They would be deployed together, their unique coordination maintained as a tactical asset. It was not the prestigious posting Kraith had once dreamed of. It was better. It meant they had value not despite their differences, but because of them. Vrak stormed out of the observation area without a word. Other instructors looked troubled, uncertain how to process what they had witnessed. But as Unit 719 stood at attention, receiving their graduation acknowledgement, the applause began. Slowly at first, then building. Many in the crowd had watched the rejects struggle for 16 weeks. They had seen the mockery, the sabotage, the constant predictions of failure. And they had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about what made someone a soldier. Rodriguez found Krayth after the ceremony. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it, Sergeant, because you refused to let us fail," she smiled. "I refused to let you give up on yourselves. There is a difference." 2 years passed. Unit 719 served with distinction in Strategic Operations Command, their unconventional approach proving valuable in complex situations that required more than brute force. They were deployed to diplomatic protection details, reconnaissance missions, and situations requiring precise coordination under difficult circumstances. Their casualty rate was 0. Their mission success rate was perfect. Then came the incident that would define them. A terrorist cell, extremists opposed to galactic unity, launched a coordinated attack on the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime during a high-level diplomatic summit. 50 species had representatives present, including heads of state and critical diplomatic personnel. The terrorists had planned meticulously, exploiting inside information to bypass standard security protocols. They struck from multiple entry points simultaneously with military-grade weapons. The elite guard units, caught off position by the coordinated assault, scrambled to respond. But the chambers were located in the central sector of a massive complex. Response time for primary security would be at least 10 minutes. Unit 719 happened to be on Nexus Prime providing routine protection detail for a minor diplomatic function in an adjacent sector. They were 3 minutes away. Standard protocol in such situations was clear: contain the perimeter, wait for properly equipped response teams. Going in undermanned against an unknown number of heavily armed hostiles was tactically unsound. Every regulation, every doctrine, every piece of training said to wait. Kraith received the emergency broadcast and assessed the situation in seconds. 10 minutes response time. At least 300 civilians and diplomats trapped inside. Active shooters with military weapons. Casualties mounting every second. He opened the unit channel. We go now. No one questioned it. This was what Rodriguez had trained them for, not following orders blindly, but making the right call when it mattered most. They entered the complex through a maintenance access PRIP identified, bypassing the main approaches where terrorists would have positioned sentries. Kraith coordinated their advance from his usual overwatch position, but this time it was not a simulation. The sounds of actual weapons fire echoed through the corridors. The smell of smoke and blood was real. PRIP, enemy positions and numbers. Scanning. I count 14 hostiles, possibly more. They have civilians pinned in the main chamber and 3 auxiliary rooms. Hostiles are using standard room-clearing tactics. 14 confirmed enemies. 6 members of Unit 719. The numbers were impossible, but numbers had never been what Unit 719 was about. Zix, can you access the facility systems? Already in. I have control of internal doors and security barriers. Life support lighting, everything. Tora, you and Ben are going to evacuate civilians. I will create corridors for you. Zix will lock down hostiles. Prip, I need continuous updates. Everyone understand. They understood. What followed was not a heroic frontal assault. It was a carefully orchestrated dismantling of the terrorist operation. Zix sealed doors, trapping terrorists in sections while opening escape routes for civilians. Tora used her empathetic skills to calm panicked crowds and organize orderly evacuations. Ben held critical choke points with precise, controlled force. Prip provided real-time intelligence on hostile movements, and Kraith directed it all, exploiting every weakness, creating opportunities before the terrorists understood they were being outmaneuvered. The terrorist leader realized too late that someone was systematically defeating them. He moved toward the main chamber where the highest value targets remained, determined to salvage the operation through a final dramatic strike. He encountered Krayth. The terrorist was larger, stronger, better armed. He was a Thorian, in fact, which added bitter irony to the confrontation. He saw Krayth and laughed. They sent a defect to stop me. Your people must truly be desperate. The fight lasted 40 seconds. It was not elegant or heroic. Kraith used every technique Rodriguez had taught him, every lesson learned from 2 years of actual operations. He used the environment, used defensive positioning, exploited openings. When the terrorist tried to use his superior strength, Kraith redirected the force. When speed was employed, Kraith was already positioned where he needed to be. He won not through power but through being smarter, more patient, more tactical. He won by being exactly what Rodriguez had trained him to be. Unit 719 held the line for 47 minutes until primary response teams arrived. When the final count was completed, they had saved 312 lives. 0 Unit 719 casualties. The terrorists had been neutralized or captured. The operation was already being analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy as a textbook example of asymmetric tactical excellence. The footage from security systems was broadcast across galactic news networks within hours. Military analysts studied it frame by frame, marveling at the coordination, the efficiency, the sheer audacity of 6 operatives systematically dismantling a force more than twice their size in a hostage situation. Defense academies immediately requested copies for their tactical libraries, but what captured public imagination was not the tactical brilliance. It was the story behind it, the rejects. The 47 failures, the human instructor who had refused to give up on them. Within days, Unit 719's history was common knowledge across member worlds. The footage of Krayth's individual combat failure during training evaluations was shown side by side with his takedown of the terrorist leader. The contrast was stark and powerful. The Galactic Defense Force had no choice but to acknowledge what had happened. A formal commendation ceremony was scheduled to be broadcast across all networks. The location was significant, the same station where Unit 719 had trained, in the same observation area where they had been told they were not good enough. Kraith stood at attention with his unit as Commander Thrace presented them with the Galactic Star, the highest commendation for valor. The medal felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it should have been. Not because of its physical weight, but because of everything it represented. In the audience sat his father. General Krayth the Unyielding had traveled across 3 sectors to attend. Kraith had not seen him since the day he turned his back in the council chamber. The old Thorian's face was unreadable, but he had come. That meant something. After the ceremony, his father approached. The crowd quieted, sensing the significance of the moment. A Thorian general, decorated veteran of countless campaigns, walking toward the son he had disowned. "I was wrong," General Kraith said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "I measured you by standards that did not account for who you actually were. I saw weakness where I should have seen different strength. I saw failure where I should have seen perseverance. I ask your forgiveness, though I do not deserve it." It was the most public admission of error Kraith had ever witnessed from a Thorian of his father's generation. The old warrior culture did not apologize easily. That his father did so now, in front of hundreds of observers, spoke to genuine transformation. Kraith looked at the Thorian who had shaped his entire life through rejection, who had driven him to attempt and fail 47 times, who had disowned him publicly. He felt the familiar pain, the old wounds. But he also understood something he had not before. "I forgive you," Kraith said, "but I need you to understand something. I did not do this for you. I did not prove myself to earn back your approval." He gestured to where Rodriguez stood, watching with her characteristic calm assessment. "I did it for her, for the person who believed in me when no one else did, who saw value where others saw only failure, who taught me that I did not need to be what you wanted me to be." General Kraith followed his gesture and studied the small human woman. Something passed across his face, perhaps understanding, perhaps respect. He bowed to Rodriguez, a formal Thorian acknowledgement between warriors. She returned it with a human salute. "Then I am grateful she was there when I was not," his father said. They spoke for a few more minutes, carefully rebuilding something that had been shattered. It would take time, Kraith knew, perhaps years, but it was a beginning. Later, after the ceremonies and speeches concluded, after the crowds dispersed and the news crews departed, Rodriguez found herself summoned to Commander Thrace's office. She expected another debate about her methods, another defense of her training protocols. Instead, she found a proposition. "The GDF wants to expand your approach," Thrace said without preamble. "We are creating a new training division based on your methods. Adaptive individualized training protocols, they are calling it. More units like 719. We want you to lead the program." Rodriguez considered this. "That would mean promotion, a command position." "Yes, Significant increase in authority and resources. You would shape how we train the next generation of GDF personnel. She was quiet for a moment, thinking about Carmen, about all the ways she had failed as a mother by pushing too hard, by applying military discipline where patience was needed. She had spent years trying to atone for those mistakes by being a different kind of instructor, by seeing recruits as individuals rather than raw material to be molded. But there was another consideration. I would be training instructors, not recruits. Primarily, yes, you would oversee the program, develop curriculum, evaluate implementation. Rodriguez shook her head. With respect, Commander, I decline. Thrace blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. May I ask why? This is a significant opportunity. Because I am not done training yet. There are more recruits out there who just need someone to believe in them. More Krayths and Zix and Toras who will wash out of standard programs because they do not fit traditional definitions. I can do more good in the training halls than in an administrative office. You could help thousands through the program. I can help dozens directly. That is worth more to me. Thrace studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but the program will still be implemented with your methods as the foundation. The Rodriguez method, they are calling it. Whether you lead it or not, you have changed how the GDF approaches training. Good, Rodriguez said. Then my work here is working. She was reassigned to a new training station, this one specifically designated for recruits who had failed standard programs. Her reputation preceded her. The intake class for her first cycle included a nervous young human who had failed basic training twice, a Vexian male who moved too slowly for his species standards, a Clethian with a chronic illness that limited her endurance, and 24 others who carried the weight of previous failures. Rodriguez stood before them in the training hall, seeing in their faces the same mixture of desperate hope and anticipated disappointment she had seen in Unit 719 2 years earlier. They expected to fail again. They expected another instructor who would view them as problems to be solved or lost causes to be processed through the system. Why are you here? She asked them. They gave the rehearsed answers, the ones they thought she wanted to hear. Service, duty, honor. No, she said, exactly as she had said to Kraith. Those are the answers you think I want. I asked why you are here. What do you want? The human recruit, a young man named Chen, spoke up hesitantly. I want to prove I am not worthless, ma'am. I want to be more than my failures. Rodriguez smiled. She had heard those words before. Good, we can work with that. She began the assessment process, studying each recruit individually, looking for strengths instead of cataloging weaknesses. The work was familiar now, but no less important. Each recruit was a puzzle to be solved, a warrior waiting to be discovered. 3 months into the training cycle, Kraith appeared at the station. He was not in uniform but wore civilian clothes, looking relaxed in a way he never had during training. Unit 719 had been given extended leave after their commendation, a reward for exceptional service. I wanted to see how you were doing, he told Rodriguez, and to thank you again. You already thanked me multiple times. I know, but I wanted to tell you something else. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I have been offered a position. Strategic Operations Command wants me to join their planning division. It is a good assignment, prestigious. But, Rodriguez prompted, hearing the hesitation, but I have been thinking about what matters, about how you changed my life by refusing to give up on me, and I realize I want to do that for others. He met her eyes. I want to become an instructor, to help recruits like I was, like we all were. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment. She saw not the struggling candidate who had arrived 2 years ago, but the confident, capable operative he had become. More than that, she saw someone who understood what training really meant. Not breaking people down to rebuild them, but finding what was already there and helping it grow. The GDF is always looking for qualified instructors, she said. But I have to warn you, it is harder than combat in many ways. You will see recruits fail despite your best efforts. You will face resistance from traditionalists who think your methods are wrong. You will question yourself constantly. I know, Kraith said. You made it look easy, but I watched carefully. I saw how much it cost you emotionally, how much you invested in each of us. And you still want to do it, because you showed me it matters. One person believing in you can change everything. I want to be that person for someone else. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Then I will recommend you for the instructor training program. But Kraith, you need to understand something. You cannot save everyone. Some recruits will fail no matter what you do. You have to learn to accept that without blaming yourself. How did you learn that? Rodriguez thought of Carmen, of the daughter she had pushed too hard, of the relationship that remained broken despite years of regret. I am still learning it, she admitted. Every day. Over the following years, the Rodriguez method spread throughout the Galactic Defense Force. It was not universally accepted. Traditionalists continued to argue for proven approaches, for standardized training that had worked for centuries. But the results were undeniable. Units trained through adaptive protocols had lower casualty rates, higher mission success rates, and better long-term retention. Soldiers who might have washed out of traditional programs found their place in the military structure. Unit 719 became legendary, their story told to new recruits as proof that there were many paths to becoming a warrior. Kraith did become an instructor, specializing in tactical training. Tora joined him, teaching leadership and emotional intelligence. Zix worked in technical training, helping recruits with anxiety learn to function under pressure. Ben taught controlled strength and precision. Prip became a reconnaissance instructor. They stayed in contact with Rodriguez, visiting when possible, updating her on their progress. She collected their stories the way some people collected medals, evidence that her work mattered. The young human recruit from her first independent training cycle, Chen, graduated and went on to distinguish himself in diplomatic security. The Vexian male became a specialist in defensive operations. The Cleithian with chronic illness found her niche in intelligence analysis, where her condition did not limit her effectiveness. Each success reinforced what Rodriguez had always believed. Everyone had value if you were willing to find it. 15 years after Unit 719's graduation, Rodriguez received a message that General Kraith had passed away. He had lived to see his son become one of the most respected tactical instructors in the GDF, a legacy more meaningful than any traditional warrior could claim. In his final communication to Kraith, recorded before his death, the old general had said, "I spent my life believing strength was measured in combat victories and physical prowess. You taught me it is measured in perseverance and the courage to be yourself. I am proud of you, not despite being different, but because of who you are." Kraith shared the message with Rodriguez. They sat in her office at the training station, the walls covered with photos of recruits who had passed through her programs. Hundreds of faces representing dozens of species, each one a story of transformation. "He finally understood," Kraith said quietly. "Most people do, eventually," Rodriguez replied. "If they live long enough and pay attention. Your father was a warrior of his time, shaped by his culture's values. That he could change his perspective at all showed great strength. I wish he could have said it sooner. I know, but he said it, that matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Kraith asked the question he had wondered about for years. "Do you ever regret it, staying in training instead of taking command positions? You could have had more influence, changed more lives." Rodriguez considered this. "I changed the lives I could reach directly. That was enough for me. Besides, influence is not just about scale, it is about depth. I would rather profoundly impact dozens than superficially affect thousands." "What about your daughter? Did things ever?" Rodriguez shook her head. "Carmen and I speak occasionally now. Brief messages, nothing deep. She has her own life, her own family. I'm not part of it, and I have accepted that. Some damage cannot be fully repaired, only acknowledged. That must be painful." "It is. But it also reminds me why this work matters. Why I train the way I do. Carmen taught me that pushing someone to break is not strength, it is cruelty. Every recruit I work with benefits from that lesson, even if it came at terrible cost." Kraith nodded slowly. "Then perhaps nothing is wasted, even our failures become lessons." "That is the hope," Rodriguez said. "That we learn from mistakes, grow from failures, and become better versions of ourselves. You are proof of that, Kraith." 47 failures that led to one success that changed how the galaxy thinks about training and capability. Years continue to pass. Rodriguez aged, her hair going completely gray, her movements becoming slightly slower. But her mind remained sharp, her dedication unwavering. She trained hundreds of recruits, each one carrying forward the lesson that strength came in many forms. The GDF officially adopted the Rodriguez method as standard training doctrine, though implementation varied by station and instructor. Some embraced it fully, others paid lip service while maintaining traditional approaches. But the change had begun, irreversible and spreading. When Rodriguez finally retired at the age of 68, 3 decades after joining the GDF, the ceremony was attended by representatives from 40 species. Former recruits traveled from across the galaxy to honor the human instructor who had changed their lives. Unit 719 sat in the front row, older now but still connected by the bonds formed in training. Krayth gave the primary speech. He spoke of failure and perseverance, of being told you were worthless and proving otherwise, of the power of someone believing in you when you could not believe in yourself. He spoke of 47 rejections and one human instructor who saw potential where others saw only inadequacy. Sergeant Rodriguez taught me that I did not need to be the warrior my culture defined, Kraith said, his voice carrying through the assembly hall. I needed to be the warrior I actually was. That simple shift in perspective changed everything. It changed me. It changed how the Galactic Defense Force trains soldiers. It changed how we think about strength and capability. He paused, looking at Rodriguez directly. You once told me that everyone has a warrior inside them. You were right. But what you did not say, what I learned by watching you, is that finding that warrior requires someone willing to look. Thank you for looking. Thank you for seeing us when no one else would. The applause was thunderous. Species that rarely showed emotion openly displayed respect. Rodriguez stood and acknowledged it with the same calm assessment she had always shown, not uncomfortable with the praise but not quite sure what to do with it either. After the ceremony, as crowds mingled and stories were shared, Rodriguez found herself alone for a moment on an observation deck overlooking the training grounds. She watched recruits running drills, saw instructors correcting form, heard the familiar sounds of military training that had been the backdrop of her adult life. Sergeant Rodriguez. A young voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find a Thorian recruit, barely past adolescence, standing nervously behind her. I am sorry to bother you, ma'am, but I wanted to tell you something. Go ahead. I have failed the entrance examinations 4 times. My family says I should give up, that I am not warrior material, but I heard about you, about Unit 719, about Kraith and the others. The young Thorian's voice wavered. I applied to the integration program because of those stories. I wanted to ask, do you think someone like me could succeed, even after 4 failures? Rodriguez looked at the recruit and saw Kraith standing in the shuttle bay 16 years earlier. Saw Zix and Tora and Ben and Prip and all the others who had been told they were not enough. Saw herself at 17 being told she would end up dead or in prison. 4 failures, Rodriguez said. That is nothing. I knew someone who failed 47 times, and he went on to save 300 lives and change how the galaxy trains soldiers. So yes, I think you could succeed, but you need to understand something first. What is that, ma'am? You cannot succeed by trying to be someone else. You have to find out who you actually are, what your actual strengths are, and become the best version of that. Can you do that? The recruit straightened. I want to try, ma'am, Rodriguez smiled. Good. We can work with that. She stood on the observation deck, watching the training grounds where thousands of recruits from dozens of species prepared for military service. Many would succeed through traditional paths, excelling in standard metrics. But some would struggle, would fail, would be told they were not good enough. And somewhere, instructors trained in her methods would see those struggling recruits not as failures, but as warriors waiting to be discovered. They would ask not, why do you keep failing? But what kind of warrior are you meant to be? The Rodriguez method would continue long after she was gone. The lesson would spread. That strength came in many forms, that failure was not permanent, that everyone had value if you were willing to find it. Rodriguez thought of Sergeant Thompson, the drill sergeant who had seen potential in a small girl from a bad neighborhood and taught her that she did not need to be the biggest or strongest. She thought of Carmen, the daughter she had failed by pushing too hard, whose pain had taught her a better way. She thought of Kraith and Unit 719 and all the recruits who had passed through her programs. Some lessons were learned through success, others through failure. The important thing was learning, growing, refusing to give up on yourself or others. Maria Rodriguez, former gang-adjacent kid from Chicago's South Side, retired sergeant of the Galactic Defense Force, walked away from the observation deck. Behind her, the training continued. Ahead of her, whatever came next. She had done what she set out to do. She had proven that Thompson was right, that everyone had a warrior inside them. You just needed someone who believed it first. And that belief, passed from Thompson to Rodriguez to Krayth to countless others, would continue spreading across the galaxy, one struggling recruit at a time, one refusal to give up at a time, one discovered warrior at a time. The story of 47 failures that led to fundamental change. The story of a human instructor who saw value where others saw inadequacy. The story of Unit 719 and all who came after. The story that proved sometimes the most important victories are not won on battlefields, but in training halls where someone refuses to let you give up on yourself.